name's Morgan. I'll be doing the benefits and risks of reintroduction attempts. So reintroductions involve the movement and release of organisms into areas of their indigenous range from which they have been extirpated or have been declined sufficiently that their numbers require bolstering through reinforcement. So captive bred animals or artificially propagated plants form base of source population. They benefit the recovery of a rare species because the project has the opportunity to implement legal protection and community education for long-term sustainability. It has an emphasis on genetic diversity for long-term population viability. That's usually determined through GIS analysis and some modern technologies so that the population will hopefully maintain genetic diversity and last upward of 1,000 years. It helps the population retain its wild behaviours to be passed on to future populations. It looks at the species holistically, including the holistic the identification of specific behavioural training needs to survive in the wild. And it can also be used as insurance against extinction. So the Save the Tasmanian Devil program is trying to establish an insurance population that isn't affected by the tumour cancer virus. So whereas it hasn't quite created a viable population yet, it will in time, and it demonstrates the importance of zoos to buy time for the species, and hopefully eventually that insurance population will be used in reintroductions in the future. So reintroductions are conducted to safeguard diversity for future generations and to maintain ecological functions. So for example, wolves were reintroduced because they are a keystone species for Yellowstone National Park. That was following a trophic cascade of the caused by the deer population that was going out of control without its top predator. And it's also really important to maintain ecosystem engineers. So bilbies, which I have an example of here, are really good at altering and breaking down leaf litter, which has really interesting implications for the fire management in Australia. So reintroductions of animals are conducted through a couple of steps. So firstly, a viable captive population needs to be established. At that stage, scientists will have to research behaviour, genetic and demographic management of the population. So there's an emphasis on maintaining genetic diversity and to make sure that the age and gender demographics are suitable for each specific species. Field studies need to be conducted to ensure that there's suitable habitat in containing critical resources for each species. This also needs to include looking at the political and social climate of the surrounding areas and any human influences that might be at play, and look at any non-native species in the area or any predators in the area that could be need to be managed during the reintroduction program. The habitat preservation and management includes protection from deforestation, degradation, exploitation, and poaching. The principal cause of species population decline is the habitat destruction. So we need to look at managing and restoring degraded habitats, and that might include joining fragmented patchworks. The conservation education for long-term support might include professional training, public relations and educational strategies, formal and informal community training. It's been proven time and time again that the more a community is educated and involved, and the more stakeholders are involved and integrated, that the more likely the project will be long-term sustainable. The preparation and reintroduction of animals includes choosing the correct candidates that will have the best chance of survival, and that's considering future genetic needs so that no behavioural or morphological characteristics or deleterious genes are passed on to future populations. And we're also looking at the age and gender classes that would make up a suitable demographic. And at this point, we are training in survival techniques, so foraging, feeding, anti-predator tactics, locomotion and orientation that suits the species. So for example, a herbivore might not need training in food acquisition, whereas a primate or a predator will need to be trained in food acquisition. and then given a hard or a soft release. Wild bred individual will have a better chance with a hard release strategy. However, a captive bred might need a soft release strategy, so that involves giving it time to acclimate to the food, the climate, the temperature, and any diseases. There might be a place that might include food supplementation or having veterinary staff on standby, and shelters provided to ease them into the reintroduction site. And then in the event of failure, it has to be possible to remove or destroy all offspring. So we don't want to create any hybrids or release any deleterious genes into the environment, because it will destroy other species. We don't want to do that. So plant reintroductions follow some similar patterns. Big difference is plants can't disperse on their own. So there needs to be a consideration to choose the perfect habitat. Ecologists do this by experimenting with site treatments. It might include burning leaf litter or excluding grazing animals. They need to choose between either sowing seeds or transplanting juvenile or mature individuals. They use PVA analysis to determine which is going to produce long-term genetic diversity. Unfortunately, these reintroductions fail a lot because it's not captured in literature. But bottom line is, the more genetic diversity and the larger the population and metapopulation is, it will increase long-term survival through stochastic events. Frequently encountered issues include habitat degradation, that's the big one. Understanding all of the different technical factors at play, it can be really hard to negotiate. Cost is hugely prohibitive. The United States spent over several $1 million reintroducing peregrine falcons. The collaboration between multiple institutions and disciplinarians is a huge organisational event, but we know that the better organised and a project is, the better the outcome for the reintroduction. So Australian and New Zealand zoos tend to use the one plan approach, which aims at a well-planned, coordinated approach involving all of the stakeholders over a sustained period of time, and it normally results in successful reintroductions. So they failed in the past. Scientists often underestimate the scale of habitat degradation and the ongoing threatening processes. Disease, predation, invasion of non-native species is a big problem. Poor release and management strategy, often that would be due to not investigating or researching enough. Small population size and drift, so the original population wasn't big enough. Poor husbandry protocols, poor management, goals aren't clearly stated, difficulty managing funding dynamics, not enough staff, and poor community and stakeholder engagement. Lack of empirical data to support decision-making processes. So scientists have a bit of a bias between publishing their wins but not publishing their losses. So it's difficult, as this is unfolding quite modern science, for everyone to learn off of everyone. Also acute and chronic stress and failure to anticipate or failure to train. So stress reduces cognitive function and therefore reduces chances of survival. And for the failure to anticipate, bird reintroductions, including the California condor, had the majority of deaths due to their collision with power lines, and the consumption of lead. They were dying from lead poisoning from eating carcasses that had been shot by lead shot. So this case study is on the Golden Lion tamarin. It's an ongoing success story, thank goodness. In the 60s, the Golden Lion tamarin almost went extinct and the captive population was not going well. The 70s saw that the captive population was improved and a reserve was established. In the 80s, research was conducted on the demography and the socio-ecology of the tamarins. Community education and reintroduction of the captives began. 30 zoos contributed 146 tamarins. In 94, some threatened groups were translocated. Then in 2014, numbers reached 3,700. In 2016, a yellow fever epidemic wiped out two of the largest populations by 90%. And in 2024, the population reached 4,800, thank goodness. So this, the Tamarin project is one of the oldest and one of the better, well-documented reintroduction projects. So we have a lot to learn. So huge surveys were conducted all over the Atlantic forest to identify which forest fragments were suitable in multiple municipalities. A pre-release behavioural training was quite extensive. It included mixing the wild and captive tamarins so that the captive ones could learn wild behaviours. It also taught the captives how to forage. So the protocol was to gradually replace a single bowl of food with food that was distributed in different locations and in different puzzle boxes. And the soft release allowed for acclimation to the reintroduction sites, so it reduced immediate post-release deaths. There was excellent management and well-defined goals. Long-term research protocols were developed by American and Brazilian biologists during multiple international conferences. Community engagement reduced the effects of poaching and illegal animal trade. Subsequent tamarin releases occurred on private property, so that was because the community wanted to be involved. And during 2016, the yellow fever outbreak, a public program had community members reporting tamarin deaths, so scientists were able to track what was happening. The legal protections were established as early as 1964, which is probably why everything is working long term. There has been legal enacted protections. So the Brazilian Fauna Protection Law was enacted in 1967. In 1974, a specialist reserve was created, and the International Committee was created in 1981. So there are multiple levels of local, state government and international protections. In 1994, 6 of the threatened groups were translocated, so this saved their lives, but it also saved a lot of genetic diversity. So the work that has been done on these tamarins have allowed them to survive multiple stochastic processes. So one of them includes competing with other non-native primates for food and resources, and they have managed to survive the yellow fever epidemic. And according to the PVA analysis and genetic analysis using GIS, they've still managed to maintain genetic diversity even though they've had massive population hits. So that is a really good way to define how well this project is going. So in conclusion, it is essential to have a viable captive population that is large, has extensive genetic diversity, and is well trained. Pre-release research is essential, and that includes field surveys and socio-ecological behavioural patterns. It is so important to educate the community and to integrate all stakeholders. The organisation management and community involvement ensures that it has a long-term sustainable viability as a project, and it should work. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this presentation.